Welcome back to the Analyst training course. In this lesson of Module 1, Foundation, we're going to dig into what an analyst is. The goals of this lesson are to define what an analyst is, to summarize the role of an analyst, to determine the characteristics of an analyst, and also to introduce you to a few analysts that I regard as role models. In relation to the last goal, the point of that portion of this lesson is to define the type of analyst we're trying to mold you into. This will become clearer as we move through that section of this lesson, but I want to be sure that we define your analyst persona with specificity. So let's get started. So how do we define what an analyst is? Well, let's go to Webster for the answer. According to Webster, an analyst is a person who analyzes or who is skilled in analysis. So there are two words there, analyzes and analysis. It seems like Webster's using the word in the definition, but let's look past that for a moment. These two words are worth breaking down a bit more. Let's start with analyzes. The definition of analyzes is to study or determine the nature and relationship of the parts of something in brackets by analysis. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. I've highlighted a key part of that definition, relationship of the parts. We'll get back to that shortly, just remember that phrase though. Let's look at the word analysis now. An analysis is a detailed examination of anything complex in order to understand its nature or to determine its essential features. Okay? There's two phrases here that we need to take note of. Anything complex and essential features. Okay, this is getting interesting now. We're getting closer to a working definition. Anything complex, let's look at that first. I think that we can assume here that that applies to the something described in the analyzes definition. So we now know that an analyst analyzes and the output or deliverable is the analysis. Okay, so the who in this case is the analyst, the what is analyzes, and the why, or the output, is the analysis. Let's dig a bit deeper. Okay, so we have three key phrases that were used in the definition of an analyst, analyzes, and analysis. Let's start with anything complex. I would say that data most times fits that characteristic, meaning that it's complex, and then an analyst has to do something with that complexity. Next, we have relationship of the parts. That hints that there must be relationships or patterns living within the complexity of the data. And lastly, we have essential features. So in those relationships or patterns, hide the essence or essential features of the data. So to summarize, in the complexity of data, there are certain relationships or patterns, and within those relationships, there are essential features which are the essence of the data itself. A little confusing to think about, but it will get a little more clear as we move forward. Alright, so we're getting closer to a working definition of what an analyst is. Let's just take this one step further now that we have those three things in place. The first part of the definition is anything complex. As we've determined, most times data is inherently complex and messy. In that complexity are relationships, which we will call in this case information. Information in this case is the connections or patterns within the data as we discussed before. The last and most refined part of that definition is essential features, which we will call insights. Insights are the essence of the information which is sourced from the overall data. So how does an analyst fit into all of this? Well, The analyst is the overarching connection or individual whose action turns this complex data into information and then ultimately insights. So let's pull this all together into a working definition of what an analyst is. We will use this definition of what an analyst is through the remainder of this course. So an analyst is an individual who simplifies complexity by refining data into actionable information that facilitates decision making through insights. So 1, they simplify complexity. 2, into actionable information. 3, through insights. And 4, those insights facilitate decision making. So that's what an analyst is. As you can see, an analyst is so much more than just a title.